So I saw Band of Brothers when I was deployed one time. I actually used to be a C-130 crew member on active duty, and I remember being deployed to Bagram and watching that whole series for the first time and really connecting with all those characters. But then as I started to talk with people like Steve Burke and our current squadron leadership, we really started to dive into that history and see that we had a large part in that D-Day invasion. And then it brought a whole new meaning to Band of Brothers and watching all those paratroopers jump out. And it was like, wow, that's what our squadron did at that time. It's just crazy to think about. So we're here at the 301st Airlift Squadron. This is our heritage room. We're one of the really fortunate squadrons that has a super rich history from the beginning. And we have this room that is actually quite large that we use to remember what our predecessors have done over the years. And the room is currently under construction, but we're slowly piecing it back together. And one of the things we've been trying to do is separate these two display cases. So this one right in front of me here is more of our current history. It documents the missions that we've been flying with the C-17 Globemaster III. And then on the other side here, we have more of our beginnings, our grassroots from World War II. So Lloyd Neblett was a very young, very successful squadron commander during World War II. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for...
I mean, that's like the first one for the 301st, or?
I believe so.
I believe it was.
And it is a 301st Troop Carrier Squadron?
Yes.
TCS, Troop Carrier Squadron.
Okay.
So it was a big day, right?
Yeah.
The night of June 5th,
Yeah.
leading into the morning of June 6th.
Mhm.
And the squadron took off from Merrifield. And when they hit drop zone D, which is outside Verville, France, what a lot of people don't realize, they thought just paratroopers jumped out of the side doors
Yeah.
of the C-47s. But they actually carried cargo bundles underneath on the belly, like strapped
Right.
to the belly.
Uh-huh.
And they would just drop that by parachutes to the heavier equipment.
Mhm.
And what happened was everybody's dodging all the flak, the German anti-aircraft fire, and the plane above him got right above him when it dropped its cargo bundle. And it went down and the parachute wrapped around his right wing.
Oh, wow.
And he went out of control. It made him roll and was heading for the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually what saved his life was it ripped 8 feet of his right wing off.
Oh, wow.
And he managed to correct the airplane about 100 feet off the ground. And his jumpers got out. When I met Lloyd, he told me this story that everybody has a tendency of thinking this is Hollywood, is history. We never think of ourselves as acting in history till we're old and realize, oh, I guess that really was history. Mm-hmm. He was telling me he's trying to keep the airplane flying, mm-hmm. and what they were supposed to do is hit the drop zone, do a dog leg out of the way, and then back to England, so they weren't going head on with all the inbound traffic. And this Lieutenant Bornfiend was his navigator, and he called him Bernie. And he said he's struggling with the airplane to keep it airborne, and he goes, "Bernie, get me home." And Bernie just gave him a heading to turn to, and he goes, "Thanks." And they went ripping right across all the inbound, how they didn't crash,
Right.
all the inbound air traffic to Normandy. They got back 15 minutes ahead of everybody else. But he got the DFC for saving the airplane, getting his cargo and his passengers, his paratroopers out. It's just a really nice old man. Just did extraordinary things, but he was just a regular guy.
Right.
Just a regular guy. In his DFC, it talks about him. This is the actual citation, the typed down citation.
Right.
It talks about how the 301st took off from Merrifield, which this painting depicts him leaving Merrifield. But it says he did an emergency return for a maintenance problem.
Yeah.
Came back around, landed. His crew chief fixed the problem, and they managed to get airborne, and he got back in the front, caught up, and led them on the drop. But it wasn't a maintenance problem. His crew chief was so nervous about this being the night of the nights and the invasion of Europe, he forgot to pull the gear pins on the landing gear. So when they took off and they go, "Gear up," the gear wouldn't come up. And his flight mechanic's like, "Oh no, I forgot to pull the pins." So he hurried up, turned around, landed. He stopped. Crew chief jumped out, pulled the pins,
You think like,
and they got airborne again.
they probably
Right?
have like some checklist, but because of the situation,
You're
it's probably like the first time you're gonna go to war.
Oh,
sure.
they're freaking out. They've been waiting 4 years for this.
Yeah.
This is the biggest military operation in the history of mankind ever. And I like that story because people make mistakes.
Right.
You're just a normal person, right? This isn't Hollywood. This isn't John Wayne. It was just some nervous kid who forgot to pull the pins.
And he was a captain at that time.
And Neblett was a captain, yes. He retired as an 06 colonel.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
I
And
think
he was
another-
a squadron commander as a captain.
I think another thing that people forget about is this was like the second start of it also, because if I remember correctly, they were getting ready to launch, take off, and take all these troopers into combat, and then there was a delay and they had to wait a certain amount of time and basically reattack it the next day. So talk about nerves. You've already gotten yourself all amped up to do it one time. Now it's time to hop on the plane and fly out there and do the real thing.
Oh, correct. Yeah, June 6th was not the original date for D-Day. It was prior to that, but the weather would be wet. They're like, we're going to slip it 24 hours. You know, same thing. These kind of things happen today. Weather. We're going to slip it 24, slip it 24. And finally, when it came down to it, Eisenhower, like, it's marginal. It might be okay when they hit the beach. And Eisenhower's like, I can't keep the lid on this jar forever. He's like, it's never, and if we wait, it's going to be a month and a half. So he just said, he rolled the dice and he said, go, just go. And that's why we went. And we were lucky because for hours when the guys were hitting the beach, they didn't know if it was working, if it was successful or not. It was kind of touch and go.
What about the 101st? You want to talk about?
Sure. So there were many squadrons participating in this airlift, and there were a lot of different paratroopers too. There was the Pathfinders, the 82nd, and the 101st. But if I remember correctly, our squadron exclusively airdropped the 101st. So that's something that's made famous in the show Band of Brothers. They drop Easy Company in behind enemy lines. And although we didn't have Easy Company on any of our planes, it was still really cool to have that heritage of carrying the 101st and knowing that our airmen went through that exact same
Those guys
thing.
were legendary.
Right.
We also, what a lot of people don't realize, and you don't see it much in Band of Brothers, we flew C-47s, right? So that's all the glory. Everybody knew we flew C-47s. We dropped on D-Day. It was awesome. We also flew gliders. It was a 2-aircraft squadron.
Oh, wow.
C-47s dropped, but the gliders came in a couple hours after them and landed in the fields. And as I met Captain Douglas Maltby, or Lieutenant Douglas Maltby, before he passed away, I met him and I was talking to him. And he said, glider pilots never get enough credit. And I'm like, you're absolutely right. Because C-47 guys, they were in the lead, they dropped, and they flew back to England. The glider pilots basically crash landed their gliders into a French field. And once they landed and everybody got out, he picked up his rifle and he was now an infantryman. So he's in the middle of the combat. You know, so you're a pilot for the first couple of hours, and then you're an infantryman for everything after that. And that was really, really dangerous. We lost a lot. They have a thing in the French countryside in Normandy called hedgerows. And our intelligence at the time thought they're about a berm that was 3 feet tall. It turns out they were 7 to 8 feet tall, and they kind of miscalculated it. So when you're landing a glider in a field and there's an 8-foot dirt wall waiting for you, it didn't work out well for a lot of those gliders.
The Troop Carrier Command was ready for its next move. They had massed hundreds of British and American gliders in preparation for the most gigantic aerial towing job ever attempted. Each held a full cargo of jeeps and guns, and the fighting men to use them. The lives and success of those who were already in France depended on the flight of this vast armada. They were greatly outnumbered and desperately needed these reinforcements. How they got them, a story of two-way air traffic and an unbroken chain of planes and gliders stretching from England to France and back again, is best told by a man who was a part of it all.
Maybe we glider pilots didn't show it, but we were as excited over flying across that English Channel as Blériot must have been when he flew it for the first time, years before most of us were born. He didn't have much of an airplane under him, but then there weren't any German guns waiting for him on the other side.
The lineage of the 301st, we started in Sedalia Field, Missouri in 1943.
Okay.
And apparently from my research, about every airlift squadron, that's where they were born. And then they went to Camp McCall, Georgia, which in Band of Brothers, they were at a Camp Toccoa, but they would go to Camp McCall when they actually did their jumps. So we trained with paratroopers training them. And then we made our way to England, and they were in RAF Merrifield was the airfield they flew out of.
Okay.
Then we dropped on Normandy, and then eventually we moved to the continent. We were flying out of some forward fields in France. And then after the war, we were the first squadron to occupy Tempelhof Airport Air Base in Berlin. We were the first Allied unit to get in there. We were deactivated in 1947, 1946 or 1947. Then they were reactivated for the Korean War.
Okay.
And then after 1953, they deactivated, and they were deactivated for a while. Then in the late 50s, they were reactivated at Hamilton Field over in Novato. And they flew C-124s, Old Shaky. We have one at the museum here, the big gigantic one with 4 giant propeller, radial engines. And then I believe it was 1969, we got 141s, and that's when they came to Travis.
Okay. Oh, okay.
And we had 141s for a couple of years. And then they got the C5 in 1973. And we had that until 2006. Yeah. We got the C-17.
So started like when you saw, did you learn about the squadron first, or before the Band of Brothers, or which came first?
So I saw Band of Brothers when I was deployed one time. I actually used to be a C-130 crew member on active duty, and I remember being deployed to Bagram and watching that whole series for the first time and really connecting with all those characters. Then I ended up coming over to the reserve components, got recruited by the 301st, and I knew there was some World War II history there. I didn't know it that well. But then as I started to talk with people like Steve Burke and our current squadron leadership, we really started to dive into that history and see that we had a large part in that D-Day invasion. And then it brought a whole new meaning to Band of Brothers and watching all those paratroopers jump out. And it was like, wow, that's what our squadron did at that time. It's just crazy to think about.
Yeah. So wow.
So it's funny because we lost all our heritage when we were deactivated for that for a long period of time. In those days, there was no internet. Well, yeah, I'm old, so the internet finally came around. Yeah, I remember no internet. I remember no iPhones.
Yeah.
We used to read books, actually. It was very interesting. But when the internet finally showed up, I mean, now you're like, I just Google it, right? That wasn't a term then. You can find out everything you want. But back then it was new. And a few of us, we just started digging. Chief Sanborn has been retired for a while now, myself, Colonel Pavey, a bunch of guys from the squadron. We just started digging and digging and digging. And we found Colonel Nebel, who was still alive, living in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And we're making phone calls. Wonderful man.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he's a real class
So he's
act.
the one who donated that uniform?
He is. And actually, we did a heritage flight back in 2007.
Where did you guys go? To France?
We went to England. We went to Merrifield. We did a heritage mission. And we actually went to Merrifield and we presented. I got up on the cross of the intersection of the runways at Merrifield. We had a formation and we read Colonel Neblet's DFC citation. We went to the Cambridge National Cemetery where we lost a crew on D-Day. Well, they're buried in France, but we had another crew that was lost in Scotland, and we visited their graves. We didn't know it existed, right? Until we got to the internet and we realized, oh, we lost 2 crews, one on D-Day and one about a month and a half later. We went and visited their grave sites. It was amazing because we knew nothing. We knew none of this before the internet comes around. Everybody starts digging. And if you see this clock we have here, it's actually a ship's clock from a Navy ship. And why would we have a Navy clock in our case, of heritage case? In July of 1944, a month after D-Day, the 301st was flying medevac, right? We have an AE unit here. We were flying medevac back in 1944. So we had wounded from the Normandy, campaign region, and we were flying them back to Scotland, where they had some hospitals set up, right? England was kind of full. We're taking them to Scotland. Right. And this crew got real bad weather at Scotland, right? Everything's foggy. They got lost in the fog and they realized they had flown past Scotland. They were heading towards Ireland. So they had to turn around and come back. And they're in the fog and they're trying to get lower and lower. And when they hit the coast, literally the first airplane hit the peat bog at the top of the cliff and bounced up back in the air. They radioed back to the plane behind them, pull up, pull up, pull up, and it was too late. And they flew right into this granite wall on the coast. Killed everybody. Plane disintegrated. And you couldn't get to the beach. It was just a gravel, like 20 feet of beach. This clock was on there. Okay, so it brings us to how do we get that clock?
Right.
Internet comes around. A gentleman who was a detective for Scotland Yard, right? He's a law enforcement. His father was a member of the Scottish National Lifeboat Foundation, which is like their Coast Guard. And his dad told him how in 1944, an American plane crashed off the coast 3 miles down, and they heard it and they saw smoke coming up, and they got on their boat and they went out there and they found one gentleman still alive.
Wow.
And one of the things that came out of the wreckage was this clock.
Oh, okay.
So he reached down, he wrote us a letter. He's retired, he was doing some research, and he got a hold of the squadron via the internet, got our address, sent us a letter, and we actually went up to Scotland, met him. We got on a boat, and he took us out to the crash site where the plane had crashed. And we got the clock, and there's a photo album here that the local school, and mind you, this town was like 20 houses, one bar, a hotel. I mean, it's like everything but leprechauns in there. And they did a photo album where they took pictures of the pilot and some of the nurses. Like I said, it was medevac, and the whole story's right in here.
Okay. So are all these items here related? I mean, I see what's that, like a parachute or something?
It is. Right. These are all related. They're all from that era. And like Steve mentioned, some of it is actual equipment that our crews used at that time.
That was Neblet's helmet. That's Neblet's parachute.
Oh, that's his parachute.
That's his parachute. Yeah, that's his uniform for retired. And it's interesting, if you look on his uniform, it has Royal Canadian Air Force pilot wings.
Did they work with them?
Well, what happened was we were training so many pilots in the States that we couldn't keep up with the throughput. So we sent a lot of our pilots up to Canada to get trained at Canadian pilot training bases, and he was one of those guys. So when he graduated, he actually earned Canadian wings, which is pretty cool.
It is.
This is a model of his airplane. It was called Round Trip. If you've seen the show Band of Brothers, which everybody should have if you have not, start seeing it. Don't make me talk to you about this
They're
again.
probably going to watch it more now.
Oh, they better.
And writing stuff down and like.
Yeah. But if you watch Band of Brothers, when they show all the C-47s taking off to go hit Normandy, they have L4 on the side markings of their aircraft. And ours was Z4, which is 1,000 times cooler than L4.
Yeah.
Z4 is much cooler, as we all believe. So that's the one thing we latched onto. You see it's on the side of the airplane here. Patch, if you look at his patch, Z4 with the invasion stripes. That is directly a representation of the C-47s we flew. We're really proud of that Z4 thing. I don't have it tattooed on my body, but trust me, it's been talked about a million times, and I usually sober up just enough to stop myself from doing it. Yeah. But we're very, very proud of it. It's nice to have this kind of heritage, because there's some squadrons, they don't have this kind of heritage, and they would just kill for this kind. I know the 79th. They were a troop carrier squadron as well. They flew C-47s. They were, I think, part of the 436 troop carrier group. So their heritage is an airlift.
I believe they were.
They're air refuelers. They probably don't want to admit that now, but they were airlifters.
And I think at this time they were in the Pacific Theater.
They dropped on D-Day.
Oh, okay. Never mind. Actually, you know who I'm thinking of is the 21st.
The 21st.
The 21st was in the Pacific Theater.
The active duty squadron, 21st and 22nd. Their heritage is in the Pacific, flying over the Himalayas.
Yeah, speaking of the Z4 thing, talking about digging through history and trying to find anything about our unit, one thing that's really fun is there's always new movies and documentaries coming out about World War II. And every time I see anything about Normandy, I watch it very intensely because I'm trying to find out if any of our planes are in that footage. And it's actually really exciting because every once in a while you'll see footage of all the C-47s lined up, and that 2-digit identifier on the front tells you what unit they're with. And every once in a while we'll see one roll across with that big Z4 on it, and it's like pause, take a picture, send it out to everybody, and like, go watch this documentary on Netflix and watch our crews in action taking off to go get into the fight.
It's another thing that's very fortunate for us in Frederick, Oklahoma. I went there and visited it. It's really in the middle of nowhere. It's an old Army airfield, and they have 2 C-47s there that they do I guess it's like a World War II 101st Airborne parachute camp. So guys dress in the period garb, and they actually learn how to parachute, and they drop out of C-47s, and both their C-47s have Z4.
We have
tail.
one here at Travis, right?
That
Yes,
one's
but it
for
doesn't have the Z4.
Yeah, that one's for you, I believe. That one's
I used to
okie
know what
dokie.
unit.
The okie dokie, yeah.
Yeah, we'd love to go over there in the middle of the night and repaint that, but trust me, it's been talked about, but you can't really get away with that. But
I think what's great about being in the reserve is like you guys get to like stay here,
yes,
Right.
absolutely.
you know, and that's what I noticed because I did like a documentary with 41 and a half years guy, Palmer.
Oh, Dave Palmer.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Son Palmer.
Mhm.
41 and a half years, right? And then, so you get to take care of the heritage. You get to own it, you know? And I think that's like what's the beauty about the reserve is like, not just like a continuity on the maintenance, but a continuity on the heritage too. Because you get to like belong to this history.
Right.
Yeah.
And
So it's like, I think that's what's the beauty about like in the reserves, you know?
It is. And you talk with active duty folks, anyone who served on active duty, they've had assignments that they've really enjoyed,
Right.
and they've had squadrons that maybe, they didn't feel like they belonged in as much as others. But here at the 301st, we know where we're going, and we know who this squadron is, and we can choose to be a part of it
Right.
for one term or for our entire career.
Yeah.
And it really
Nothing wrong
grows.
with the active duty, but
Right.
They
Oh, no.
They do their tour every 3-4 years.
But there's some continuity here that you're not going to get anywhere else.
Yes,
Right.
but that's like what I like about like I'm noticing the more I feature like it's our service members like on these documentary stuff.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, and as Steve mentioned in the past, maybe we weren't as aware of our history, or maybe we didn't talk about it as much as we do now, but it is legitimately part of our recruiting process. And when we have new folks come to the squadron, this is one of the first places I take them and I show them, this is what our squadron is all about. This, from the beginning, these are what our people have done. This is what's expected out of our people.
Right.
This is the legacy that we have to uphold, and when they get back from their technical training in day one into the squadron, our leadership team sits down with them and says, this is what we expect out of our people. You're going to have people asking about the Z4, about our heritage. You've got to be well versed on it to be able to talk about that. And I think part of that is continuing the history, but another part is instilling a sense of pride in these folks that they really are serving something bigger than themselves, and it goes way back to the beginning.
My name's Senior Airman Blind.
And where are you from?
I'm from Vacaville,
Vacaville.
California.
Do you have a family related to Air Force? Or?
I do. Both my parents are in the Air Force. So my dad is actually a C5 loadmaster, same job as me, just different planes.
Are he still serving?
He is, yes.
Oh, wow.
He's still
so
in.
You guys get to like work with each other?
Yeah.
How does that feel?
Oh, it's awesome. It's an honor. It's good to live up to his expectations.
How long you been serving?
I've only been in the squadron for about 6 months. Before that, I was in training. It's pretty awesome. It's an honor to be able to live up to all these guys. Right when I got to the squadron in January, I learned about everything and realized how big of a deal all this was, really. Yeah, I mean, it's an honor. I mean, sometimes you forget how lucky you are to actually serve in the military. I meet a lot of people, and they always say like, oh, I couldn't do something like you do, or if you got deployed, I couldn't do that. And to me, it just seems like my job, but it's a big deal.
Have you deployed before?
Not yet, no.
Getting ready?
No. Yeah, getting ready.
Always ready, right?
Yeah.
So what do you do? Like you go to school too at the same time?
Right now, I'm just in training, so I'm getting proficient on the job and learning my way around the airplane, all that.
What's your favorite part of the job so far?
I don't know, probably just being with the guys. Like, you fly around the world with, guys.
I can't wait to go.
Oh yeah, I'm excited. You get to fly around the world with, all basically your best friends. It's pretty awesome.